So I don't know about you, but I find English to be a little bit of an odd, let's make sure that this is on perfect, a little bit of an odd language. And I don't think I really realized it until I started learning another language. So when I was a kid, and I've told this story before for sure, but my family, I was born in Toronto, spent a number of years in Toronto, started school in Toronto, and then in between grade 5 and 6, moved to Montreal and had to start learning French, so that was fun. Learned French like all the way through high school and then university, and I don't know about you, but as I had to learn another language and learn not only the technical right way to speak and use a language, but also to learn the slang and conversational language. It started to point out to me just how bizarre some of the things that we say in English can be. And so I got thinking about this again as I was thinking about this series on church and what is the church and maybe what do we think of when we think of that word church, and what are some of the ways that maybe we have used it, especially for those of us who have spent time in the church, a part of a church, or even grown up in it, like how we use that word without even thinking about it in ways that may not always make sense. And so I don't know if you're going to be able to think of anything off the top of your head, but I looked it up because I had to read a list. Here are some of the funny things that we say in English that don't actually even make sense. Do you know what it means to sweat like a pig? Yeah, it means to sweat a lot. Okay, but I start running and I'm sweating. Like the guy who I run with, he doesn't sweat. I'm convinced it's like something is broken. He will not sweat. He's a superhuman. I take 3 steps and I'm drenched. We were running in -4, whatever it was, -30 something in the winter, and I was sweating and I was still drenched. So I know what this means. Turns out that pigs don't sweat. Doesn't actually make sense. Okay, it's raining cats and dogs. Yeah, again, it makes sense to us, right? It's raining heavily, but also it never happens. The dog days of summer, right? Sweltering hot. This one may be a little bit, but to kick the bucket, right? Okay, we all know what that means. How about this? Break a leg. That's a good thing to say to somebody, right? Haven't broken a leg, thankful that I haven't done it, but it doesn't sound all that pleasant. It's always darkest before the dawn, right? But it's not. It's not dark, it's darkest at midnight, okay? Things that we say, we have language that makes sense, even though it doesn't make sense. And I think the same thing can be true about the church and Christians. We have sayings, words that we say, things that we common practice in the church that don't actually make sense. And so this is the part that could fail catastrophically, that they teach you not to do in seminary, but we're going to try it anyways. I'm curious if you can think of any sayings that we have in the church that when you really think about it, might not make sense to somebody who grew up outside of the church. Born again. That's number 1 on my list. Even in the Bible, people are like, this doesn't make sense, right? To be born again. Or this put this way, I got saved. All right? Saved from what? I mean, it's a good question. It leads to good conversation, hopefully. But it doesn't click the way it might click for you. Anything else?
Washed in the blood.
Yeah, washed in the blood. That doesn't sound particularly nice. But it's filled for if you are a follower of Jesus, it is filled with life, it is filled with promise, it is filled with hope, and it also just maybe doesn't make sense. When I was a kid, and I tell too many stories about when I was a kid, it's like the only stories I have. My dad's a preacher, my dad's a pastor, and my friend was sitting next to me, and in the middle of the pastoral prayer, he leans over to me and he's like, yeah, your dad must like you a lot, because he says your name all the time. But it turns out my dad is like, God, would you grant us this? Grant us that. That's how he prays. And my buddy leans over, we were in grade 3, grade 4 or something. He leans over, he's like, this doesn't make sense to me. Why is he saying your name? There are just things that we say, right? On fire for God, if you're enthusiastic, to let go and let God. Common phrase, carries a lot of weight and meaning, and maybe even for you. I'm not making light of the power in these statements. They are all very true. They just don't always make sense unless you've come up in the church. Praying for a hedge of protection. That was always one that I found a little strange. I'm like, am I supposed to picture a juniper bush? Like, what are the things that come to mind? And here's where we're going. I think even the term church itself has gathered momentum and meaning and difference in meaning over the years. And we don't always mean either what we intend to mean when we say church. And I think we don't always mean the same thing when we say the church. I don't think that our society, and maybe this is why these things happen, I don't think that our society, people today, like myself included, all of us, are very good at recognizing that we are products of a cultural moment. That every single one of us has grown up inside of a culture, inside of a place, inside of a time, right? With certain people, with certain influences around us. And we sometimes fail to recognize how that has actually shaped or formed us, who we are, how we speak, what we look like, how we dress. Like all of the things that we become are shaped by things around us. We're shaped by our surroundings. And what happens is that communities can become really insular. Communities, groups of people, without even realizing it, can become myopic, have like singular focus on certain things, whether that is right or wrong. And so I do think that these 3 weeks, today included, is particularly important for those of us, myself included, who grew up in the church, who maybe have spent a little bit of time around Christians as a part of a congregation, as a part of a church, to pay particular attention to the way in which we talk about and think about the church and what we are called to do. So I want to get at it using like a style that we developed here anyways through the pandemic. I just want to walk through a story with you. And it's the story of, really a discussion between Jesus and his disciples, mainly Jesus and Peter. And so I'm going to put it up on the screen here for you to see. If you can't see, you can also move to see, or you can pull out a Bible. I know some of you like to follow along in a physical Bible, write in it, underline all of those good things. It's found in Matthew 16, and it's one that's going to be familiar. But this is the story, or this is an interaction that Jesus had between his disciples at a place called Caesarea Philippi. So when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" There's a couple of things, and again, some of this might be review that I just want to highlight for us that I think are important as we work our way through. And the first is that Caesarea Philippi, so this place here, Caesarea Philippi is a particular place. You can still go and visit it. I've been, you can take pictures, you can see kind of the ruins. It's an archaeological site now, but it is a place, a city, located next to a spring. It's called Caesarea Philippi to differentiate it from another Caesarea Maritima, but it is an important place, not only for Christians, but for everyone who lived in that region. We've talked about this a little bit, so again, it may be a review, but Caesarea Philippi is located beside a freshwater spring. And that freshwater spring, obviously, throughout generations of people living in a desert, would have been pinpointed and named a source of life. Right? It's fresh water. It is the source of life. It allows for life to flourish, and so naturally life would flourish around sources of water. But what happened is interesting at Caesarea Philippi and Peneus, the actual spring itself, is that monuments started to literally spring up to different gods in gratitude for the source of life that people had received. And so the god Pan, or the god of desolate places, the Greek god of desolate places, is essentially, it's named after Peneus, Pan, because the people recognized that the water led to life. And so in gratitude, built structures and monuments and temples to the gods. And still to this day, you can go and see archaeological dig ruins of those temples, of those monuments to the various gods. And in Jesus' day, they would have been there in full force, with gratitude, right, for the source of life that people had received. If you go, you can still find it. And so it's an important backdrop to this whole conversation, because really what we're going to see is Jesus has the conversation, asks his questions, and then, in fact, hears Peter's declaration, in view of, in face of all of these options, different gods to be worshiped, right? And so as we continue reading, Jesus asked the disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? The Son of Man appears, I think it's 81 times in the New Testament. And it's a throwback to Son of Man, a Hebrew term found all throughout the Old Testament. And Jesus uses it to link who he is, his identity, to the prophetic language, Son of Man, found in like Daniel and other books, prophesying the coming of a Messiah, the coming of a Savior. And so what Jesus is saying is, listen, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Who do people say that the Messiah even is, or the Savior, the rescue, the one who is to come? Who do people say that this person is? And so they reply. They say, listen, some say it was John the Baptist. Others say that it was Elijah. Still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Listen, again, people are saying that this is who we were waiting for. Well, we were waiting for John the Baptist. We were waiting for Elijah. We were waiting for Jeremiah, one of the other prophets. And this, I love this, and we're going to just kind of keep going through. Jesus doubles down. He says, listen, but what about you? He asked. And then his question changes. Who do you say I am? So now no longer who do you say the Son of Man is, but who do you say that I am? Jesus linking himself to the Son of Man, to the prophecy of the coming Messiah. And this is where we get this declaration. Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Peter affirms it. He says, this is who we proclaim you to be. This is who we believe you to be. You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. And it's a declaration, right, of Peter to Jesus. And I think it becomes the declaration of the church to Jesus as well. And so it's important for us as we spend these weeks talking about the church, it's important for us to remember where the church begins, where it is founded, where it has its roots, its foundation. In other language, in Ephesians, writers call Jesus the cornerstone, the chief cornerstone, right? The stone, I'm not a builder, but the stone that sets everything else in place. If you want to know what's level, you look to the cornerstone. If you want to know what's right and true, you look to the cornerstone. Like it is the stone on which everything else is built. And this, what I think reveals to us is, listen, if the church is to be the church, it needs to be built on Jesus. And not only on Jesus, not only on the fact that he lived, not only on the fact that he had some teaching that was great, not only on the fact that he was crucified, as a political prisoner or, person who people wanted to do away with, but on the reality that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. The church is founded on Jesus. So we continue reading. Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." This is really fascinating to me. But the word church, this word that we read in English, doesn't actually appear in the Bible. At least not in the way in which we have come to use it. This term that Jesus uses in Greek, and I'm going to see if I have enough space to do this here, is ekklesia. Okay? And ekklesia does not mean a building. Ekklesia does not mean a denomination. Ecclesia doesn't even mean like an institution. This word is used, and it's a political word. It's not just used in the New Testament. It's used to refer to a gathering. Okay? I don't know if you can follow that, but a gathering. A group of people. And not only a group of people, but a group of people with a purpose. And so what Jesus is saying is, listen, you are Peter, and on this rock, and there's been a lot made of, okay, well, what is this? Is it on Peter? Is it on the person of Peter? Okay, is it on Peter's declaration, which I think is a pretty good place to start? Is it on the declaration that Jesus is the Messiah? I think that's probably the right and true place to say. But on this rock also, okay, so Petros, Peter, Petros, same word. I will build my gathering of people. I will build my assembly. I will call people together and I will give them a purpose. I will start my movement. Connie calls the church, and I love this language, a movement with a mission, right? We are people, and we've been given a purpose. I'm not going to ask you which one of those you think sounds better. One's mine, one's hers. The church has never been about a place, right, or a building. The church is about the life and the teaching and the death and the resurrection of Jesus and the mission that God is on. I will build my church. And then we continue reading, and it says, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. We can also say the gates of hell. Some translations here just say hell. But the gates of hell, the gates of the evil one, the gates of the one who opposes, the gates of the underworld, the gates of death itself will not overcome what Jesus starts with his life and his death and his teaching. The church, if we are to continue in true alignment with what God intends us to be, we need to reclaim and claim and hold on to the reality that it's not about denomination, it's not about institution, it's not about building. Buildings come and buildings go. It is about the people that God gathers together. And the people that God gathers together has a purpose. We have a mission, and we're going to talk about that next week, so I'm not going to spoil it today. But there is something that each one of us is called into, to be a part of the movement that Jesus created, that Jesus started with his life and with his death and resurrection. It says the gates of hell will not overcome it. Before the pandemic, one of my friends ran some numbers. He's a minister in the denomination. This was a few years before the pandemic. And one of the things that our denomination that we are a part of, the Presbyterian Church in Canada, wrestles with is that we, along with pretty much every mainline denomination in Canada and now broader, is in steady decline. And so he's like, I'm just curious, if we are to decline in the same, rate, at the same rate, when will there just not be enough people to call ourselves a church anymore? Like what is the end of that steady decline? He calculated, again, this is before the pandemic, like 2040, at that rate. And yet I read this and I say, listen, Jesus is saying even death cannot defeat the church, what God has called together. Those God has called together, those God has assembled and sent off into the world with a mission. And so we've got these competing narratives. And I think that what it calls us into, what it invites us into, is to remember that at the end of the day, we together, you together, are the church. And we are part of the church in the world, people with a mission, people with a purpose, people called by God. And he says, if we have this foundation, the declaration that Jesus is the Messiah, the declaration that there is life over death, the declaration that Jesus is the Son of God, who he claimed to be, he says, not even the gates of hell will overcome it. Next week, we're going to talk about what the church is called to do. And so if I could tip your hand in a particular direction, I would challenge you to think about this. If the church is a movement with a mission, or people with a purpose, what might your role be in that?